The next program point will be a talk with 3 really cool and really interesting people from different fields. The next talk will be about the question, the guiding question, what opportunities can digitalization open up for universities? And yeah, there are really a lot of different topics which pop up then, but we will try to talk about some of them, which we think that are interesting. And yeah. To my left, there's Dominic. I'm really happy that he's here today. So when I prepared for this symposium, I came across him and thought, okay, he does so many things. He is really a good person to talk to when it comes to future of higher education. Because he's not only adjunct professor for educational management at the University of Nova Gorica in Slovenia, because he's at the same time team lead at a learning platform called Atingi with 80,000 registered users. He advises different committees, the EU, the UNESCO, the OECD, and the World Bank. On my right, there's Martin Ebner, coming from the TU Graz, and also I think I came across him already before that because he's really a person you should know when you talk about e-learning, innovative methods of teaching, and yeah, a lot of different things, and open education in general. His research focuses strongly on seamless learning, learning analytics, open educational resources, maker education, and computer science for children. He is currently head of the Department of Educational Technology at the Graz University of Technology, and therefore responsible for all university-wide e-learning activities. He holds an adjunct professorship on media informatics research area educational technology and works also at the Institute for Interactive Systems and Data Science as a senior researcher. And to my far right, there's Martina Mara. She's located in this building at the Open Innovation Center. She's leading the Robopsychology Lab. And as you see on her T-shirt, she's also part of this year's Ars Electronica Festival with her team with the project Demystifying AI. You can see it in the Learning Center, so really highly recommended, check it out later. And a part of that, after many years of research in non-academic environment, including Ars Electronica Future Lab, she was appointed professor for robopsychology in April 2018. Her work focuses on psychological conditions of human-centered technology development and interdisciplinary research strategies. Furthermore, Martina is part of the concept group for the new technical university in Upper Austria. So, yeah, now we can start. You know all the people sitting here. You both know each other from before already. And because you worked together and collaborated at the project AHEAD, the goal of this study was to analyze current trends and practical examples in the areas of knowledge and competence requirement, learning theories and didactics, and digital technology in education. On the basis of that, you published really recently the publication Higher Education Landscape 2030, a trend analysis based on the AHEAD International Horizon Scanning. So yeah, you're really deep into this topic, and I'm really glad that you're here. For this talk, I think we really try to, there's no big structure, we really move freely from different topics, but for keeping the structure and not get lost, we try to focus on 4 topics, which would be the first, like, why do we have to rethink universities? Why can't we just keep on doing what we do? What are these drivers for change, and what dynamics provoked this rethinking? Second, what should? What is the ideal university? And what are ideal situations and in the future? As a third, what is? What is the status quo right now? What are, is it already really ideal or not? We will see that. And what is most likely to happen? Like scenarios, what you maybe think are most likely to happen in the future, because, yeah. And we start with the first topic, why? Why should we rethink? In your publication also, you start with a publication from the universities of the UK, Solving Future Skills Challenges, and that was really stayed in my mind. Like the study, 65% of the children who start in elementary school today will work in different jobs when they start to work, which is really a lot, I think. According to this statement, I would like to ask Martina, as also, why do you think do we have to rethink universities? Why don't we can just carry on doing what we ever did?
One reason might be that I think we have to address broader target groups. Like I think still universities today are actually not very inclusive environments. Like it's very difficult to get involved in university education for people who are not into the system. This is the one thing. So I think it would be really important to make the contents that we produce anyways more attractive also to people who are outside the system, and maybe we could motivate them to get into it later and attract new students. And also in general, like I teach for bachelor and master students in computer science, artificial intelligence, and also psychology. But especially if we say that digital transformation is such an important topic, and we have to get more people into technical studies and computer science and so on, I think we really have to attract more diverse groups of people to start these kinds of education. So I think this really has to be changed. We have to address more females, for example, in especially these fields of study. We also have to address people who don't self-identify as tech nerds from their early childhood or from their youth on. Yeah, I think this really has to be changed. We have to become more inclusive and address more diverse groups of people with the contents that we produce.
So inclusion, one point, and also a changing work space in the future, like different working conditions, also digitalisation. These are like four. What would you add, Dominic, maybe?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me now. I'm unused to this thing. Yeah, for me, one of the, why we should change. Across the whole of the world, particularly in Europe, we've had a massive expanse of higher education in the last 20 years. Taking Germany, I think we had something like 24% of a cohort going to university, and we're quite close to something like 40% now. So we've had this massive expanse, but the organization of the university hasn't changed much, which has led to some really, let's say, suboptimal or even terrible practices, which is kind of coping strategies for this. Things like the fact that for many exams now we're using multiple choice just because it's a coping strategy for how we deal with this. So I think in a way what's happened is the space and the campus in a way of who is coming into the university has changed, but the university itself hasn't changed enough. It hasn't been reflecting enough on that. But I think part of that, and I think we'll come back to this, is there was another change that happened also in the last 20 years, which we were touching on in the last talk as well, which is this whole kind of way of governing and organizing universities, which has been very much based on some very standardized practices. One of those is using indicators for various things, including for funding universities, and another of those is setting up quality assurance systems. I'm actually a fan of both of those things, but not in the way they're implemented at the moment, for the reasons that Sarah was mentioning before, which is they're very simplistic the way we're doing it at the moment. So in a way, I think my biggest argument for why universities have to change is they have to catch up with the reality that's actually already happening.
So there's also kind of the world is changing, the work in future is changing, the people are changing, but universities are more or less keeping being the same, or in some ways.
I mean, it's a bit unfair to say that in a certain way. We're in an amazing building here, and I know there's a lot of change has happened. But I think also, just take one example, because Martina was talking about being more inclusive. So also in Austria, we have this idea of more and more adults or older students coming to universities, but we treat them as if they're 18-year-olds. So that's what I mean, really. There's been a lot of things that have happened, but we haven't really thought them through properly, and particularly we haven't thought them through from the learner perspective. We've thought them through, on the one side, from the institutional perspective of the university, but also on the other one, which is how is this manageable from a policy sphere? So I think those are challenges we definitely need to address.
Martin, what changes would you see also that we feel already now? Like, okay, the changes of digitalization, what do we feel today? How can you, so a practical example that we feel today that we have to change something?
Yeah, I come a little bit back to this inclusion part, because I would give you like a story from this project and what is in my mind. Yeah, so we were at the Wannsee, yeah, in the evening. Yeah, Dominic, I, and also a little later than Michael Schmidt, and we were discussing these scenarios. It was before the pandemic, of course. We even don't know that 2020 is happening in such a crisis, and where we discussing these kind of scenarios, I thought always I'm the conservative, because I'm sitting here, I'm from a formal institution. I said, no, that's not possible. We are not able to do that because we need that. This will not work because of the law and something like that. And then Dominic showed me a study where we see that the next generation of students are not the traditional students in the age of 20 to 25. It's becoming maybe a student completely older, 30, 40, and because we have to re-educate them, we have to give them high education level education, and it blows my mind, because I said, holy shit, we are not able to educate people who are coming from the industry, who are completely have already maybe a kind of degree, have some schools, have experiences. That's a complete different kind of target group. And if we have to address those people, then we have to rethink our education. We must be flexible. We must be using technologies and something like that. And I would say that was the driver of this study, to say, okay, we are working not only with young children, with the youth of today, we are working with the whole world, with the whole society. And this is a change. And of course, now it's the pandemic. We are able to use more technology, but we are not there what we need maybe in 5-10 years.
Could I add one other point just to the study, because I find it interesting, and Martin has already touched on it. This was, of course, it was a project funding from the ministry, so we had to apply for it. And when they originally did the call, their idea, and I forget what the actual title of the call was, but their idea is, how is the university going to change because of digitalization? And as Martin said, when we were discussing the whole time, how are we going to approach this study? We just said, we don't know, because digital is changing all the time. And I remember also in this meeting that Philip Schmidt was saying, look, the iPhone has only been around for the last 10 years. So we can't really know what digital will be like in 10 years' time. And then that's why we said what we do know is we can look at demographic changes and also changes in society, which tell us something more about what learning pathways might be like. And so that's how we kind of approach the study. So digital always played a role in the way we're thinking, and I think also in the discussion now, but it's always the second point, because you don't know exactly what digital will be like. We have experienced this also the last couple of years. There's lots of changes all the time. So you always have to think about what is the main thing. And just an early comment on kind of the COVID experience, I think that has been part of the problem, is we approached everything firstly with the digital question and not with the educational question.
Mm-hmm. I think students also request other offers than before, right? Based on their own digital experiences, or based on experience they made with other digital services than the university was during COVID. I mean, students don't watch traditional TV, right? They watch Netflix and maybe 5 or 10 episodes of their series on Thursday lunchtime or Sunday afternoon. And this is what they also start to expect from university, right? They don't understand anymore why they should be present at a certain time on a certain day just to attend a lecture which is not interactive. So I think it's also a request from the students to change things.
As we all already started, Martin and me before, started to talk about, so let's connect to this immediately. Also, like, COVID changed a lot, and we talked before about that students and also you don't want to be present everywhere when it's not really needed, if there's no, when it's not needed. And what about let's come to this ideal version and the formats maybe. When is presence really a plus, and when do we need present formats for learning and teaching and researching and whatever? When do we have to be here, and when can we do it digital, and how?
For me, what is rather easy, that was the same argument in 2000, also because I always said I would like to come to the university because I need it. There's a reason for it, and that might be because I would like to learn. I would like to discuss with the teacher, with my students, my colleagues, because I need the experiences, the answers. But of course, I don't need to go there to just watch and lecture. Also, watching means I'm sitting there and more or less I never ask a question, and I'm going home and said, okay, it would be better I have an streaming or a recording, because then I could watch it again. And currently we are going in this direction. So I'm very sure when the students are coming back to our university, they would ask for that, because they have learned now for 1.5 years to watch our streams. And if I have no argument, or it's not better than the presence, the face-to-face education, they will leave and say, okay, then I go home and you have the possibility for recording. And that's a chance. As I see, there is a possibility, because we can use that now. So we can say, okay, you have to come because you can, I don't know, talk with Martin Ebner because it's interesting. And if it's not interesting, then you should be at home with. We have to learn a topic, and the university should become a place to learn and to discuss. And maybe we have also to rearrange our whole lecture rooms. Yeah, that's might be a reason. Yeah.
And is it because you said watching a lecture, should not also is the lecture and just watching it also not like putting just a lecture online? Is not that the same, or should we also rethink that type of lecture?
The provocative idea to say, in former years I watched the lecture in the lecture hall, yeah, and I was coming and I said, okay, there was no real reason why I have to go to the lecture hall, maybe because my friend was on the side of mine. But that's the reason. What I would like to talk about is that if there is no interaction, if there is no discussion, if there is no reason I'm really learning, then maybe recording is better. Also I often say that we can make a live stream, a recording from a studio. You don't need lecture hall. That's better. You have better sound. You have better view. You can recall it. Whatever. There is really benefits. But of course, if we are interactive, we are working together. We have groups and something like that. Then of course, face to face is better. Yeah? And we should begin to think about that. Yeah.
Which formats are we put there? When do we need? Yeah.
Sorry, just to add to this, I wanted to give an example that I heard a while ago from somebody at King's College in London. A number of years ago, they decided, they're going to do. They were going to record all the lectures, and then it left the students with the opportunity either go to the lecture or you can watch it online. But they didn't change anything else. That's the only thing they really changed in the studies. So what happened, as Martina said, the students, if at all, if they watch these every week, they'd watch them at, because it's streaming, you can see when people are watching, so they watch at 10 or 11 at night. But mostly they binge watched them. Because often, I'm British, so often in the British university system, the key exams are at the end of the year. So basically, they just ignored everything till just before the exams and then binge watched the whole stuff. And that's really interesting because it's exactly at this point that the rest of the thought that should have gone into, okay, if we start streaming, what happens next? Just didn't happen. It was just, okay, this is probably a good thing for the students, let's just do it. And the one question is, of course, okay, well, if you're going to start doing something like that, you have to think a bit more about how you're going to actually assess whether people are reflecting on what they're watching. And the other thing, I would like to make a connection to another thing which you've probably heard in Germany. We have this big open letter, which I think is still around, which is, I think, this big argument for the return of presence at the campus. So I've been a bit critical about that because I found that they used a very kind of simplistic way of arguing, okay, you're either present or you're not. So it's actually, it's a very kind of, it's almost a 1-0 kind of idea. So it's either one or the other. So it's almost actually already arguing digitally. But the point about this is, yes, there are a lot of arguments for saying presence and interaction, personal interaction makes a lot of sense. But you have to think what they are and then start redesigning some of the programs, because what it isn't is as I think you're quite right, there's no point in a huge lecture hall just to have this kind of passive interaction, which is just like watching TV, but you're actually physically there. And we all know, and we know from our daughter, that basically in those lectures, the students are doing something else anyway. So it's a waste of everybody's time at the end of the day. But of course it's a huge challenge of how do we cope with that. But I think it's an interesting point now. What are we going to do now, where suddenly we do all have the chance of actually coming back and meeting? Are we going to use this as a chance, or are we going to say, oh God, lucky that's all over, let's go back to square one, which I hope won't happen.
I just want to say, that's so true, that binge-watching phenomenon with the on-demand content. We also experience that a lot. And it's actually a bit risky for the students because some of them tend to underestimate the effort and the time that needs to go through all the lectures at the end of the term. So some or many even did not pass the course in the end because they underestimated it. So but there are ways to handle that, right? I started to establish mini tasks with extra points, so to keep the students on track during the term. And I think if we discuss about the ideal future university, I think how to use presence time and for what formats to use, on-demand digital stuff and physical presence is really a core question. We have to come up with clever, complementary, hybrid strategies for future universities. And I think that physical presence really has its value for many formats. If we talk about future skills, and if we say that we have to support our students in, being critical thinkers and being able to conceptualize and do ideation with their colleagues and be creative, and if we want to support their social communicative skills, which many experts say are very relevant future skills, I think we have to have physical formats, or at least very interactive formats where our students can train that. And physical presence may also be important to establish some kind of community spirit, right? If it's too fragmented and if students don't feel like a community, I think this also can be a problem. So it's really about this, how to cleverly use this and that.
Also yesterday, just because this present and digital, this is also a question because you mentioned future skills. I think there are also ways to kind of train them digitally, and we talked a lot about digital right now. So why should we be present, and in what situations? And also for me, for me personally, I just recognized yesterday that when you're present, you also talk about something else. You have a chat, you talk something random, and then you come up with a new idea. And that happened digitally from my side, not so often. But what is the,
For me, it's a rather simple answer, because learning is a social process, always. Yeah, and you need others for discussion, for answering questions, for asking questions, and whatever. And that's the reason why we need. Otherwise, each library would be enough. I can say, just read a book, you have learned that, and that's not true. We all know that, and it's the same thing with videos, with recordings, streamings, whatever. And our task at the university is to make that happen. That's we can offer them, now they come, we would like to engage you, we would like to say the failures, we see what is right, what is wrong, and whatever. And you have a community or a group, whatever, where you can discuss that. And if the main problem of this pandemic was exactly that we are not able to make this community online. That's the hard way. That is the weakness of digitalization. Yeah, and now we have to combine this weakness and the strengths of the face-to-face with the strengths of the digitalization, and this is my hope for the future. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe also the other point that you were mentioning, Martina, as well, which is that when you come together physically, I think it is easier to be more experimental and more creative, and that's really, in my eyes, that's the place of the university now. So knowledge itself is, or let's say information is abundant, and then you need the interactions to be able to start learning processes and to progress in learning, but you also need this kind of safe space to actually try things out, think things through, discuss them with other people. And I think we all know, and everyone also just in the working environment, we've noticed that if you're doing things just digitally, it's very difficult to recreate this very open space. You can do it to a certain extent, but it is difficult to do. And I think this is the key role the university should be playing. The university is really well placed for being this experimental social space where it has a relation to being in a digital world, being in an interconnected world, being in a flat world, all of that. But it's a place where you can try things out, you can discuss things with people without any direct consequences, and often it's very difficult to recreate that in a fully digital environment.
Mm-hmm. So university should be place for discussion, I just sum up, for projects and for really to experiment with different things, like to create an art project for the Ars Electronica Festival.
For example.
No, but that's really like practical working on a project and being a community and reaching like some goal together and have a presentation. Okay, that's really, I think, really interesting, because also yesterday we talked about architecture has a big impact, and I think a lot of universities are often more like rooms for lectures.
True.
Yeah.
We need more workshop spaces and labs for experimentation and so on. Yeah.
And also, before you talked about this person who is 40 and also wants to be part of, also want to come to a university. And in the study Uncharted Territory, a guide to reimagining higher education of the Stanford University, they proposed a concept of the open loop university. This university concept changes the time component of a regular study program into a lifelong learning model, allowing students to loop in and out of the study program whenever they want. In this concept, everybody would have 6 years over their lifetime to spend at the university. This is just a time thing. What other things, I think that's really interesting, this time component, but also a part of, as we talked about formats, but what is the structure in general? What are there other alternatives we can think of? And also grading. Is grading still useful? Or I'm just asking. Access? Yeah, maybe start with the structure in general. What would be ideal?
Well, maybe back to the study we did, because I think that's the point. There's no ideal structure. And also, when we did the study, we also thought we don't want to do one of these future studies which says in 30 years everything, or in fact it was then like in less than 10 years, everything will be completely different. Instead, we wanted to look at what's happening at the moment, and do we think certain developments will be amplified, and do we think certain things will stay the same? So we still saw within this, so we tried to describe what we called like a landscape of higher education in 2030. And one of those elements was really the classical university as it's organized now, pretty much. Of course, things will change, things that we're talking about, a bit more experimental, more introduction of digital to kind of expand the learning environment beyond physical constraints. But essentially this idea, and also what we did is to make it easier to remember the different models, we gave them names according to toys. And this was our Tamagotchi model. It's a little bit sarcastic on our side, because if you think of the Tamagotchi, it's stuck in an ecosystem that it can't control itself. That's why we called it the Tamagotchi University. But we still think that this plays a role, and particularly maybe for starting people off. Because if you look at statistics, you'll see people who have taken part in higher education will tend to be the biggest group of lifelong learners as well. So obviously something's happening there that means you've kind of built up some competencies and skills which you can use throughout your life. But then we also said, okay, let's just think of how we can change the structure slightly. And just because I won't go through all 4 models, but we just mentioned the 40-year-old coming to university late. And I mentioned already that at the moment, what happens is that this person will come to the university and be treated as if they're 18. This model we called the transformer model. And with this model, we actually said, well, the didactical challenge here is that in part, this person has left the formal education system a long time ago. So there's certain kind of routines, techniques, etc., that they don't have. There's some basic knowledge which they don't have as well. But they've also had they've had, let's say, 20 years, maybe outside of the first section of formal education, 20 years of personal and probably vocational experience. So what we need something which actually recognizes that and works with that. And when you start doing that, then you really have to think about how can we change structures to make that possible. And also it means that you've got now the challenge that you have to recognize certain skills and competencies which haven't been acquired in the learning process that you as a university have designed. And this is a challenge, but I think this is to your point. Do we need how are we going to deal with assessments? And I think if we think of assessments as recognition of acquiring certain things, then we have to think about how can we organize this recognition process. So I think that is so once you go beyond kind of the what we call the Tamagotchi model, you do get to these points, which is what kind of structures work better, how are we going to organize recognition, and what are the didactical challenges we have to deal with. And I think this is a really interesting point when we also come back to indicators. We really are just pretty much ignoring everything that's happening in kind of teaching and learning. It's really not well replicated in any kind of indicator system. And actually we know also in the lives of an academic, this just doesn't bring the kind of the recognition that would mean it's easier for us to spend more time and effort on it. So I think this is partly a challenge coming from outside, but it's partly a challenge within the university as well of how to deal with this.
Now you mentioned two of your models.
Okay, I'll mention the other ones between, because those were also the extremes essentially. Between you won't be surprised that one of the models were called Lego. It's obvious really, so it's basically quite a different approach. In this case, the learner themselves, they put together their own learning system. Now the interesting thing is, how do you recognize that, firstly? And the second one is, how do you make sure that's not a socially exclusive model? Because, I mean, I did a study many years ago where we asked people in a number of European countries, young people, how they decided to go to university. Most of them said, it's because my parents advised me, or I know other people who've gone to university. So if you now think, okay, we're going to put someone in a learning pathway they completely design themselves, then obviously this social proximity system they've got, so parents, etc., is really going to determine that. So that's the biggest challenge with that model. And then the one kind of between those we called Jenga. You probably know this Jenga model, which is like building a tower. The reason we use Jenga is not the first element of the game where you just build a tower, but the second element is you start to pull out the bricks. And you reach a point where you've pulled out kind of the maximum number of bricks, but the tower is still there. And the interesting thing is it possible for us to look at many of the degree programs we have and say, can we actually reduce them down to only the core of what you really need to get you started? I've also been quite involved in the Bologna process, and I'm rather bored with the idea that a bachelor degree must take 3 years, or depending on the system, but essentially, and a master's must take 1 or 2 years, depending on which system we're in. Who cares about the time? It's not the time, it's the content, and it's the interaction with this kind of within this learning environment. And so the idea with Jenga was, what about if you could, for example, have a much shorter kind of foundational degree, which starts you off, and then the rest you actually get through other educational providers or through your workplace. And we also saw, well, maybe the university still plays a key role here, because the most sensible way of building this is to actually try and have a concept of what the full learning program, the full bachelor or something would actually look like, even if it's not all happening at the university. And so that's how you get the accreditation afterwards. But the interesting thing with the Jenga particularly is, in a certain way, and as you were saying, Martina, this has already happened the last year or so under COVID, where students have said, hey, if I'm starting to learn online, why am I actually just learning online in my own university? I can do it anywhere. And we really don't have a good way of recognizing the other bits of learning they've been doing, because it doesn't really fit into our normal way of thinking of the university.
In general, I heard like all the three others are really individualization plays a big part in that, and also we came to about access, like how is our university really open and accessible to all people, and what can maybe also digitalization, because you mentioned it's everywhere and everybody can learn. Martin, what would you say is our status quo university accessible, and how should it be maybe?
The status quo is we are working on it. As I say. So openness is one of the most important things, because the basis of all these models is flexibility. What we need in the future is that we are flexible in the pre-knowledge, flexible in the age of the students, in the programs and whatever. And therefore, and this the only chance is we need content, and open content, because we have, it doesn't matter to, my most famous example was always why must be the whole study program at one university. That's the main question, because why should I not do the one lecture there? And of course these days it's more imaginable, because 2 years ago everyone said it's not possible, but today as everyone maybe can say, okay, I would like to make lectures everywhere. And I, as a university, have to say, okay, this person has the competencies, now he get the degree for that. And this must be the drive of the future, and not I have a study program and I say, okay, if you have all passed all lectures with these gradings, then you passed it. And that's the main point. And I think openness, open education resources, also open access, open data, and everywhere is the driver for that. And of course, otherwise I think it would not work.
And get recognized.
Of course, it's also a kind of reputation of the university, because of course we should know why I should take a lecture in Linz, or why should I take a lecture in Vienna. Also because I know the expertise of these universities, there are these researchers, we heard that they have maybe these indicators. That's but the reason why I'm going there, and for sure that's a driver, because sometimes people would like to have a lecture from this person, because it's well known as a researcher in this field, and so on, and we have this possibility at least in some years.
And I mean, it's more the topic of our last keynote, but also this brings up the topic when I do classes online or learn something. Right now, I can do it for me, but at the university, I still have to do the classes. So academic credentials maybe would change there also something.
Also because from my personal perspective, it's always so, as I have 20 students in my class, and I have at least 2,000, 3,000 in parallel online. And sometimes my colleagues ask me, and what is better? I say, it's not better. The others would like to hear me. Yes, it is 2,000. That is the chance for them. And the 21s are the higher level class, because they have the personal experience. And but it's no difference, of course. It's learning, it's education, and that's how I like to think university education.
We talked a lot about now what it should be or it could be, and what are like desirable scenarios. What would you say is like at the moment? Like, could you think of best practices, good examples, which are right now already in practice? And
shall I? I can start a little bit just on some experience I had the year before last. So I've moved a little bit sideways now. I'm mostly focused on non-formal education. We're building a learning platform, for a global learning platform for German international development. But previous to that, I was also involved in a number of the European alliances, the European University alliances. And I find this a really fascinating approach. The reason behind the whole reason the EU pushed this is because they looked at Bologna, they looked at Erasmus, and they said, you know, I forget how many joint degrees there are in Europe, but it's just a handful essentially that are really working. Everyone knows, and I know from the Eurostudent study, which is something I used to do in the past, many students who get back from Erasmus have the problem to have recognized what they were doing in another university. So the idea of kind of from the European Commission was, what about if we push universities together? Now they have to cooperate, they're in a smaller group, and maybe they can actually do something. And so these alliances I find very interesting because they're really approaching this question of recognizing learning pathways where a student is maybe learning in parallel at 3 or 4 I was in the UFA Alliance, I think it was 10 universities, so up to 10 universities. How can I actually recognize a pathway which works like that? And how can I ensure quality? And those are kind of 2 of the key elements that you need if you're going to deal with if you're going to open up the university more. So it's a little bit of a closed experiment in a way because these are still enrolled students. It's not really talking about totally opening up the university, but it's really dealing with some of the key issues. And I just know from the beginnings of the discussions in the UFA group, it was a nightmare to start with because everyone's like, no, but my quality assurance system looks like this. There's no way I can recognize what you're doing. And although everyone's in Europe, everyone's in the Bologna process, these are well-known universities, this was like a big problem, but I know that these alliances are really dealing with this and they're making progress. So for me, that's one of the key developments in Europe at the moment, which is really one to watch, let's say. And I'm afraid I don't know whether this university is involved in one, but involved in something similar. But I do think those kind of things are really good.
So one part is to imagine that we, in some years, maybe 20, 30, can study at all universities in Europe.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So, but we need credentials for that, and we need the universities to cooperate. Do you think that's realistic, Martina or Martin?
Well, why not? I mean, there are some best practice examples. I mean, you both know better probably, but just one example I know and I really value is this Elements of AI online course, originally developed at the University of Helsinki, and it's a 6 weeks course. Introductory lessons on what artificial intelligence is from different perspectives, like technical, but also societal aspects and ethical aspects and so on. And by now, it was developed several years ago. By now, it's translated into many different languages, and it's actually open to everybody. So if your employees at a company should get a bit information about AI, they can take this course for free and they get a certificate. If you are a student at, for example, the University of Helsinki and several other universities who cooperate with this system, you get ECTS credits, whatever study program you are in. So I think something like that is really great, and it's also a chance for people to get to establish a first contact with a certain topic for which they may not be sure whether it's something for them. To get in touch with the topic of AI, for example, in a safe space, in a safe online course, and after that they could decide maybe to dive a bit deeper into that or start to study something like that at the university. But yeah, it's also a question of credentials, as I said, and cooperation. So JKU, for example, could decide to to give ECTS credits for people who attend this course. Yeah, it's just a decision we could make, I think.
The only thing in my experience at least, and it was only one discussion I had with them, is that if I understand right, the course isn't openly licensed, because I wanted to actually use it, and then I'd have to do some complicated cooperation, and I said, no, that's not for me. But I do think this development is interesting. We've also got in Germany the AI campus, which is also developing a number of courses in this area of demystifying AI, etc. And in that case, it's the same decision that we have on our platform that Martin has on his as well, which is everything is open source or open educational resources. And what they're finding with the AI campus is exactly as you say, that now certain universities are starting to integrate these courses into their own learning programs. And that I find really interesting when we start doing that, because that is also another way of opening up beyond the boundaries of buildings, etc.
So we can use your platform, right? Instead of elements of AI. I think.
Yes, you can use ours. We've got the course which was from the AI campus.
That's great as well.
You have to use it.
I'm sure Martin's got something as well.
Time is running, and I want to open now also this talk for the audience. If somebody would like to ask a question, comment on something. Yeah, we can.
Just for the recording.
No, yeah, that's it, exactly.
For the recording would be better with mic.
Thanks. So, I mean, I have a lot of comments and questions on the education side because a lot has been said and I could relate to most of it, but everybody's probably hungry for the lunch. So I just will put one very general question. I did not hear a lot about the research part from the title, The New Perspective on University Education and Research. So maybe if you guys have any thoughts on how this is about to change, or what is the role of the university in, you know, the coming changes to how research is being conducted. So as a PhD student, you know, I also worked a lot from home during the lockdowns, and there have been some shifts in how things are being conducted and you know. So this is a very open question. If you guys have any thoughts, I would be very interested in your thoughts. Thanks.
It's we are hesitating because it's not the topic of this round. This is the title of the whole 2-day symposium. But yeah.
Okay then. Okay, so let's go to the education part.
Research has to become more transdisciplinary. I think we could also talk about research probably. So.
Okay, then maybe I just misunderstood. Okay, then that's actually
I mean, no problem for me.
But still, I think it is. I mean, the important question is more if we talk about research as something which is continually being updated, called into question, etc. We have to make sure, of course, that's in the learning that's happening at the university. And one of the dangers which we're trying to avoid by looking at only having open educational resources, etc., is you start to codify knowledge. Martin was saying as well, you know, a digital learning course could be just a substitute for a normal textbook. Once you start to codify knowledge like that, it's not keeping up to date with all these changes. It's not allowing this kind of critical reflection, etc. And in Germany, my colleagues, they keep on talking about web-based training, which I'd never actually heard of before. And web-based training, I just say, is like learning in a box, and it's very uninteresting because it can't keep up with these things. So I think that is a really important point when we're thinking about digital. Is to always make sure any digital artifacts we're making are iterative and can keep up with these changes. And that often doesn't happen because people are trying to create the perfect digital course. And that goes away from exactly this point of how can we keep up with all these changes.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a short answer to your question, I think also research has to become much more open than it's today, and I think there's also a lot of a discourse going on open research and open science. So we have to involve more people from outside the university system. We have to make our data and our research practices more available to the public and to the research communities than today. So it's kind of a bit maybe parallel discussion for both education and research, right?
Oh, definitely. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've seen this initiative coming from outside academia so far, or rather maybe some disillusioned academics that have turned independent researchers and are doing some sort of initiatives to do this kind of open research where everybody's welcome to come and contribute to a project if they have free resources at their disposal. And this is more like government-funded research that is being done worldwide is a little bit more closed because there is a little bit more protection of the funds and maybe stuff like that.
Yeah, but things are slowly changing. We have some new funding programs for open innovation in science and research. And I think, some new possibilities to get funding for such innovative projects also pop up more and more, fortunately.
All right, then, if other people have questions, I can get back to it later.
Thank you. Yeah, you have touched on so many points, which each point is a huge challenge for universities itself. And so what I'm facing and what I'm observing is, and you said this in the beginning, that sometimes there is the wish at the universities to come back to the presence as quick as possible, because this is the cheapest way. Yeah, you just bring students back in the classroom and then don't bother about all this technology. And so the challenge for the university is, to really also train and educate their professors, their lecturers, to be able to do good presence education, because this cannot be the same as it was before. Just bringing students in a room and let them discuss is not university education, which means that we need to have experience and support to really do this kind of blended or hybrid or whatever, because we also have to, we need to provide information, yeah. So this classical, reading, but it cannot be sending the students to the library and say read the book. Yeah. So we need new skills to really provide information online that we then can discuss about this in presence, because you need some basis for doing an informed discussion. And so here I see a big deficit still, how universities can manage this, because these are costs. And also the structure of university education. So we are paid for, standing 2 hours a week in the lecture hall and doing something. Yeah, we are not paid for these all new additional preparations, all these things, and we are not skilled to do this. So how can we really manage this? So this is one issue I would be interested to hear your thing. And the other thing is, and it was touched at the end, because of there is the possibility that students can subscribe to online courses all over the world, basically. There's a new kind of competition between universities, because if there is a university having a very good professor in a certain issue, and so this course is excellent, why shouldn't we, buy this course for our students and send them there? This is a challenge for the local staff, of course, because they are challenged by this. And this will be also in the future a big criteria. And there are some voices, they say, this leads to a kind of, playing out, the local lecturers because they are always threatened there is a better one online. So how are we going to solve this? And of course there are a lot of also financial aspects, not only training the teachers, but you said also we need new architecture, we need new spaces for this new teaching. We cannot use these traditional big lecture halls anymore, or the fixed rows in classrooms what we have. So here I see a huge burden, even a financial burden for universities.
Yeah, concerning the first question, so you are absolutely right that we have to train the teachers. But for me, it's we can give them ideas in smart or fast courses to say, okay, there are different kind of models you can kind of teach, and the next step would be a kind of tutoring, or you need a peer teacher or something like that, an expert who is just going with you in the lecture and say, okay, we have to try to make it a little bit better, because also teaching is the same as learning, it's individual. And we have not a recipe where you say, okay, then it's perfect. Yeah? And I think we have to put our focus more on that, yeah, to say on peer tutoring, on giving. I have experience on that, and maybe you try out and you try to make your teaching a little bit better. And of course, that needs time, that needs money. That is always the reason: would we like to make a good education or not? Yeah, that's the final end. And to the second part, yeah, you sometimes I think you are right, yeah, because after sometimes I think I always has also buy a book for a lecture, for example, and lecture the book, yeah, and I'm the teacher who is training my students because that's the knowledge, yeah, and of course it's the best knowledge maybe in Oxford, I don't know, and if this is the best course, then why should they not use that? And I would like to help them. Yeah, so my opinion is I have to help them, I have to train them, I have to drive to them to make the tasks, to make whatever the assignments and whatever. And this changes how we teach. Yeah, and I think it's not a bad change. Yeah, because the main goal is education, yeah, and if the best source is, I don't know, in Vienna, then we should take the best source, yeah, and that's my opinion on that, and I have no fear on that, yeah. Also, that's
maybe just one comment as well, which is the strange contradiction between teaching and research, because research is fully public. I write a research paper, it goes to peers, everyone looks at it, it's a very public thing. I also build it on what other people have written before, so it's actually building on other people's stuff. Teaching, weirdly, is totally private, and normally many people say, no, I'm not going to use their other stuff because mine's better. So why is there such a difference between teaching and learning? I find that, teaching and research. I find that strange because it's the same people actually. But I think, how do we deal with this? I mean, I'm quite transactional about this. One of the things is we need better indicators, because we know that's one of the ways to change the system as well. So we need to make sure just having indicators which are focused on research or focused on project monies, etc., doesn't help, because everyone's time and resources are scarce. As an academic, I'm going to just think about how I'm going to spend my time, and I'm going to think, what brings me further, what changes my career, etc. And if that's not reflected in the indicators, then I'm just not going to be doing it, or I'm going to be doing less of it, because not maybe because I don't want to do the other thing, but it's a scarcity question.
If there are no other questions, I would like to end this talk. Thank you very much. We talked about many different topics, but I think one important thing is also that we as university should help this individual needs also be as a more individualization and an environment where people can learn how they want to learn, kind of. And also the topic of academic credentials popped up, and I want to invite you to our next and last keynote after the lunch break, starting at 1:30, Academic Credential Opportunities and Equity. It's really about what are academic credentials and why are they maybe the key in turning learning education into opportunities. And there's Philipp Schmidt from MIT Media Lab speaking, and he's really an expert on this, and I'm really looking forward to that, and I hope you're back again with us here at 1:30.